The body cam footage would haunt Officer James Patterson forever. Christmas morning, negative 40 degrees in Whitefish, Montana. His flashlight cut through darkness in the frozen warehouse, illuminating rows of ice-covered cages. 137 dogs, 31 already stiff with death. Then cage 73. A German shepherd pressed against frozen bars, ribs protruding through patchy fur, a cross-shaped scar carved into his forehead, one blue eye, one brown, both reflecting 3 years of hell. The dog's throat convulsed, producing only silence. Damaged vocal cords, beaten into muteness. Patterson, 30-year veteran, reached through the bars. The dog lurched forward, mouth opening in a soundless scream that suddenly broke into the most haunting cry ever captured on film. Not quite bark, not quite howl, almost human. 6 hours later, 50 million people watched that moment online. Among them, Richard Hamilton, billionaire drunk in his penthouse, recognized those mismatched eyes and dropped his whiskey. His dead son's dog. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Richard Hamilton hadn't driven himself anywhere in 3 years. Not since March 15th, 2021, when his BMW had crushed his 7-year-old son against a concrete pillar in their own garage. Blood alcohol level 0.18. Lucas had run out to greet Daddy, home early from another celebration merger. The boy died holding his father's hand, asking why Max, his new German Shepherd puppy, was crying so loud. Now 45. Richard commanded a $3.2 billion tech empire from his San Francisco penthouse, but he was emotionally bankrupt. His wife Emily had fled to London within weeks of the funeral, unable to look at the man who'd killed their only child. Every night, Richard drank himself toward the same concrete pillar that took Lucas, only in slower motion. The whiskey helped blur the memory of those distinctive heterochromatic eyes, one blue, one brown, of the 8-week-old puppy Lucas had picked from the premium breeder, a $50,000 genetic marvel that was supposed to grow up alongside his boy. Derek Miller had been Richard's brother once, back when their mother Margaret was alive. Different fathers. Same fierce love from a woman who worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. But when Margaret developed pancreatic cancer 5 years ago, Derek had begged Richard for $200,000 for experimental treatment in Switzerland. Richard had refused, calling it throwing good money after bad. Margaret died 6 months later in a VA hospital, Derek holding her hand while Richard attended a conference in Tokyo. The Afghanistan veteran had returned from his 3rd tour with a Purple Heart and a head full of ghosts. The VA failed him like it failed thousands of others. 6-month wait for psychiatric care. Pills thrown at symptoms instead of causes. Derek started the puppy mill in rural Montana to make ends meet. But somewhere between the untreated PTSD and the bitterness toward his brother, he became something unrecognizable. When he learned about Lucas's death, Derek had driven to San Francisco, found Max wandering the Hamilton estate, forgotten in the chaos of grief, and taken him. It wasn't planned, but keeping him, torturing him, that became Derek's twisted mission. Dr. Sarah Chen understood broken things. At 38, the veterinary behaviorist had built Second Chance's animal sanctuary from nothing after her husband Marcus died in Kandahar. Same unit as Derek Miller, though she wouldn't learn that until much later. She specialized in traumatized animals because they couldn't lie about their pain, couldn't pretend everything was fine. Unlike people, unlike her. December 24th, 2023, 6 in the morning. Derek Miller sat in his frozen trailer, bourbon bottle 3/4 empty, laptop webcam recording. His hands shook not from the cold but from the weight of what he was about to do. 3 years of secrets were about to hemorrhage into the digital world. "My name is Derek Miller," he began, voice cracking. "I'm a decorated veteran, a Purple Heart recipient, and a monster." He took another pull from the bottle. "What you're about to see should have been stopped years ago, but the system failed me, and I failed them. All of them." The video continued for 47 minutes. Derek showed everything: the warehouse location outside Whitefish, Montana, the layout of cages, the documentation of his systematic abuse. He walked through the facility with his phone, showing each imprisoned dog, narrating their stories with the detached precision of a soldier reporting casualties. When he reached cage 73, he stopped. "This one's special," Derek said, focusing on Max. The German Shepherd cowered in the corner, ribs visible through patchy fur. The cross-shaped scar Derek had carved into his forehead still pink against gray skin. "See those eyes, one blue, one brown. $50,000 genetic marker. This is Max Hamilton, the billionaire's dog, Richard Hamilton's dead son's puppy." He set the phone down, framing himself in the cage. "I took him the day after Lucas Hamilton's funeral. My brother, half-brother, killed his own kid driving drunk, refused to pay for our mother's cancer treatment, but had 50 grand for a designer dog, so I took the one thing he might still care about." Derek laughed bitterly. "Turns out he never even looked for him. Too busy drinking himself to death in his tower." The video showed 3 years of footage Derek had compulsively recorded. Beating Max with a metal rod when he barked, withholding food for days. The winter he left the heat off for a week, watching the dogs huddle together for warmth. 4 freezing to death. Max's vocal cords giving out after months of crying, the silence somehow worse than the screams. "I told myself it was justice," Derek continued, swaying now. "Richard deserved to suffer, but somewhere along the way, I became everything I fought against overseas, every insurgent who tortured prisoners, every enemy who broke the Geneva Convention. I became them." He looked directly into the camera, eyes hollow. "I was supposed to be a hero. Purple Heart, 3 tours. Now I'm just another statistic the VA will pretend they couldn't have prevented." The video ended with coordinates and a promise. "Someone save them. I can't anymore." That evening, Derek wrote 3 letters in his neatest handwriting, a skill drilled into him at boot camp. The first to Richard. "I loved you once, before Mom died, before you chose money over family. Max suffered because I couldn't make you suffer enough. I'm sorry for what I became, but not for hating you." The second to his fellow veterans. "Don't let the darkness win. Get help before you become me." The third to Max. "You deserve better than being weapons in our war. Maybe you'll learn to bark again." At 11:47 p.m., Derek swallowed his entire VA prescription of opioids with the rest of the bourbon. He lay on his bed, staring at a photo of his unit in Afghanistan, Marcus Chen front and center, the friend whose death he'd never reported to the widow because he couldn't form the words. Derek's last thought was wondering if Max would outlive him by more than a day. The landlord found his body Christmas morning, laptop still open to the uploaded video, already at 6 million views. Christmas Day, 7 a.m. The Whitefish Police Department's SWAT team breached the warehouse doors based on Derek's confession. Officer James Patterson led the entry, flashlight cutting through air so cold their breath froze instantly. The smell hit first ammonia, feces, death, then the sounds whimpering, chains rattling, and underneath it all, a horrible silence from cages that should have held barking dogs. 137 dogs in total, 31 frozen solid in their cages, positioned as if they'd died trying to keep each other warm. The living ones cowered from the flashlights, many too weak to stand. Patterson, who'd seen combat in Iraq before joining the force, felt his composure crack as he documented each cage, but cage 73 broke him entirely. Max lay pressed against the bars, every rib visible, patches of fur gone from malnutrition and self-mutilation. The cross scar on his forehead was infected, weeping pus that had frozen to his face. His distinctive eyes, one blue like winter sky, one brown like autumn earth, held an intelligence that made his suffering unbearably human. When Patterson reached through the bars, Max tried to bark, throat convulsing, but only a strangled, almost human cry emerged. Patterson's body cam captured him dropping to his knees, weeping openly as Max pressed his ruined head against his hand, the first gentle touch in 3 years. Within 6 hours, that footage had 50 million views. Animal control arrived, giving a stark assessment 48 hours to find homes for the dogs. or euthanization for the aggressive ones. Max, who'd bitten two handlers trying to examine him, topped the kill list. In San Francisco, Richard Hamilton sat in his penthouse, a loaded Glock on the coffee table beside a bottle of Macallan. He'd planned everything for today, the anniversary of the first Christmas without Lucas. The television droned in the background, every channel covering the Montana puppy mill horror. Richard barely registered it until a news anchor said, "The most shocking revelation is that one dog appears to be connected to tech billionaire Richard Hamilton." Richard looked up to see his brother's face on screen, the confession video playing. Then Max appeared, those unmistakable heterochromatic eyes that had cost $50,000 to guarantee. The camera zoomed on something Richard hadn't thought about in 3 years, a collar, partially grown into Max's neck from never being adjusted, ice crystals obscuring most of it. But 3 letters were visible: L-U-C, Lucas's collar, Lucas's dog, the puppy that had disappeared the day after the funeral, that Richard assumed Emily had taken to London or given away. His brother had stolen and tortured his dead son's dog for 3 years. Richard grabbed his phone, calling his pilot. "Ready the jet. Montana. Now." "Sir, there's a Category 4 blizzard, the polar vortex. Nothing's flying into Montana for at least—" Richard hung up, grabbed his keys the first time since the accident, and headed for the garage. 20 hours to Montana if he drove straight through. The deadline was 48 hours. He looked at the Glock one last time, then at Max on the screen, and made his choice. He'd drive through hell itself, but he wouldn't let Lucas down again. Not this time. The California sun set as Richard's Tesla pulled onto I-80 East, into the approaching storm that would either kill him or deliver him to his redemption. Behind him, the suicide note he'd written remained on the table, unsigned, ahead. Max waited in cage 73, breathing growing shallower as the temperature dropped toward -40, the deadline ticking down with each labored heartbeat. December 26th. The journey into hell began at midnight. Richard hadn't driven through a storm since the night he killed Lucas, but muscle memory guided his hands on the Tesla's wheel as he pushed through Nevada into Utah. The polar vortex of 2023 was already being called the storm of the century, temperatures plummeting to levels not seen since 1899. The car's heating system struggled against -20, then 30, as he crossed into Idaho. By noon, I-15 North was a white blindness. Truckers pulled off into rest stops, warning Richard through the CB radio he'd frantically purchased at a gas station. "Turn back, buddy. Nothing's worth dying for in this." But Richard pressed on, seeing Lucas's face in every swirl of snow, hearing his voice in the wind battering the car. 18 hours into the drive, 50 miles from Whitefish, the Tesla died. The battery, devastated by the extreme cold, simply gave up. Richard sat in the rapidly cooling car, watching the temperature gauge drop from -35 to -40. His phone had no signal. The nearest town was 20 miles behind him. Whitefish was 50 miles ahead. He thought of Max in cage 73, thought of Lucas asking why his puppy was crying, and stepped out into the blizzard. 5 miles. That's how far Richard Hamilton, soft-bodied billionaire, walked through -40-degree winds before his body began shutting down. His fingers turned white, then blue, then black at the tips. Ice formed in his lungs with each breath. Hallucinations started at mile 3, Lucas walking beside him, asking why Daddy left Max alone, why he drank the bad juice that made the car hurt people. Richard answered his dead son out loud, sobbing apologies that froze on his cheeks. At mile 5, Richard collapsed face first into a snowbank, ready to join Lucas. The roar of an 18-wheeler's engine pulled him back. Strong hands dragged him up, hauled him into a heated cab that felt like resurrection. "Jesus Christ, you're that Hamilton fella from the news," the trucker said, wrapping Richard in blankets. "The one whose dog is in that mill." The trucker, William Bull Morrison, was 67, a Vietnam veteran with hands scarred from pulling men out of burning helicopters. As he drove Richard the final 45 miles to Whitefish, Bull shared his own story. "Lost my whole unit in 68, came home, drank myself near to death. Know what saved me? A mangy mutt I found behind a liquor store. Sometimes broken things fix each other. Bull talked about PTSD, about the VA failing veterans, about Derek Miller, who he'd actually met at a veterans support group 2 years prior. Your brother was hurting bad. System failed him like it failed thousands of us. Doesn't excuse what he did, but explains it maybe. He glanced at Richard's frostbitten fingers. You're trying to save more than just a dog, aren't you? They reached Whitefish at 8 p.m. The Second Chances Animal Sanctuary was chaos volunteers, media, protesters demanding justice for the mill dogs. Richard stumbled through the crowd, fingers screaming with returning circulation, until he faced a small Asian woman in scrubs covered in blood and fur. Dr. Sarah Chen looked him up and down with undisguised contempt. Richard Hamilton, the drunk who killed his kid and now wants to play savior. Her words cut deeper than the frostbite. You think your money erases what happened to these animals? What your brother did? Please, Richard whispered. I just need to see him. Max. He was my son's. I know who Max is. Sarah interrupted. Question is, where were you 3 years ago when he needed you? When any of them needed you? She gestured to the warehouse behind her, converted to an emergency shelter. You want to see him first. You see all of them. Every single dog your brother tortured while you sat in your tower feeling sorry for yourself. She led him through hell. 136 stories of abuse. A beagle missing both ears, cut off when she wouldn't stop howling. A pit bull with cigarette burns covering his back. Derek's ashtray when he was drunk. Puppies born in the mill, knowing nothing but cages, afraid of human hands because hands only brought pain. Some dogs aggressive, lunging at the bars. Others catatonic, spirits broken beyond repair. Richard made it through 40 cages before vomiting, through 80 before his knees gave out. Sarah forced him to see every single one, reading Derek's meticulous records of abuse. Cage 12, beaten for barking. Cage 33, starved for 2 weeks as punishment for escape attempt. Cage 59, forced to fight cage 60 for food. By the time they reached cage 73, Richard was sobbing too hard to walk straight. 11 p.m. The shelter quiet except for whimpers and chains rattling. Sarah stopped at a reinforced cage in the corner, separate from the others. He's bitten 3 handlers, she said quietly. Drew blood each time. Animal control wants him euthanized first thing tomorrow morning. He's been here 24 hours and hasn't moved from that corner, hasn't eaten, hasn't drunk water. The vet thinks he's choosing to die. Richard approached slowly, and his legs gave out entirely when he saw Max clearly for the first time. The dog was skeletal, maybe 30 pounds when he should be 80. The cross-shaped scar on his forehead was infected, weeping. Patches of fur were gone, showing skin covered in scars from Derek's beatings. But worst was the collar, Lucas's bright red collar with Max in gold letters, now grown into the flesh of his neck, the skin healed around it grotesquely. Max, Richard whispered. The dog didn't move, facing the wall. Max, it's me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Nothing. Richard sat on the concrete floor, back against the cage bars, and began talking. He told Max about Lucas, about the day they brought him home as a puppy, how Lucas had chosen him because his eyes looked like heaven and earth. Daddy. He talked about the accident, about the drinking, about waking up every day wishing he'd died instead. He talked about failing everyone, Lucas, Emily, his mother, Derek, and most of all, Max. 3 hours he talked, voice growing hoarse. At 2 a.m., exhausted, Richard began humming, then singing. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Lucas's favorite Christmas song, the one he'd sung to Max every night as a puppy. A sound, the faintest movement. Max's ear twitched, then his head turned. Just slightly. Those heterochromatic eyes, one blue like Lucas's, one brown like Derek's, met Richard's for the first time. In them, Richard saw 3 years of torture. But underneath, impossibly, something else. Recognition, Max recognized him, remembered Lucas. The dog took one trembling step forward, then another. Richard didn't move, didn't breathe. Max approached slowly, cautiously, until he was inches from the bars. Then, in a moment that would haunt and heal Richard forever, Max pushed his scarred forehead against the bars, seeking touch, seeking connection, seeking what they both thought they'd lost forever, the possibility of love after unforgivable loss. Sarah Chen, watching from the shadows, wiped tears from her eyes. She'd seen hundreds of traumatized animals, but this was different. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a resurrection. Two souls, destroyed by the same tragedy, reaching for each other through bars that separated them less than the guilt and grief they both carried. 1 hour, she said softly. You have 1 hour before the board meets to decide his fate. Richard nodded, never taking his eyes off Max, his frostbitten fingers reaching through the bars to touch the dog who'd suffered for his sins. Max didn't pull away. For the first time in 3 years, he leaned into human touch, a broken whimper escaping his damaged throat, the first sound he'd made since Derek's final beating. The countdown to the morning's decision began, but in that moment, time stopped. A man and a dog, both guilty of nothing but being loved by people who failed them, sat together in the darkness, beginning the impossible journey back from hell. December 27th, 7 a.m., the second chances. Animal Sanctuary boardroom smelled of burnt coffee and desperation. 12 board members sat around a donated conference table, reviewing the list of dogs that would die today. Richard stood in the corner, still wearing yesterday's blood-stained clothes, his frostbitten fingers wrapped in gauze. Max, cage 73, the board president, Harold Morrison, read aloud. German Shepherd, approximately 4 years old, 3 documented bites requiring medical attention, severe aggression, food guarding, handler reactive, recommendation immediate euthanization. I'll donate $1 million, Richard said, his first words of the meeting. The room erupted. Board member Janet Phillips, a retired teacher who'd mortgaged her house to help fund the sanctuary, stood up so fast her chair fell backwards. You think you can buy absolution, buy your way out of what your family did. That dog is dangerous because of your brother. $2 million, Richard said quietly. This isn't an auction for your guilt, Harold replied, adjusting his glasses. We have liability issues. If Max attacks someone after we release him, he won't be released. I'll keep him here. Work with him daily. $3 million. Build a new facility. The room fell silent. $3 million would transform their struggling sanctuary into a state-of-the-art facility. But Margaret Townsend, the lawyer on the board, shook her head. It sets a precedent. Rich people thinking they can buy their way out of consequences. Sarah Chen had been silent until now, studying Richard's face. She saw something the others didn't, not a billionaire throwing money at a problem, but a man who'd walked through a blizzard, nearly died, just for the chance to say goodbye. Let him try. Everyone turned to stare at her. Sarah, you of all people, Harold began. I watched him last night. Sarah interrupted. 3 hours. He sat with Max. First time that dog has let anyone near him without attacking. First time he's made a sound. She looked directly at Richard. I'm not saying he deserves forgiveness, but maybe Max deserves a chance at more than dying in a cage like he lived in one. The board voted 7-5. Richard had 12 hours to demonstrate Max could be rehabilitated. The morning attempts were disasters. Richard tried everything, premium dog food that Max wouldn't touch, toys that went ignored, gentle words that echoed off concrete walls. Max had retreated to his corner, facing the wall, shutting out the world that had shown him nothing but cruelty. 9 a.m. became noon. Noon became 3 p.m. Board members periodically walked by, shaking their heads. He's completely dissociated, Sarah explained, watching from outside the cage. It's a trauma response. His mind has essentially left his body to escape the pain. She paused, then said something that would change everything. You need to get in there with him. Absolutely not, Harold said, having overheard. "The liability alone." "I'll sign whatever waiver you want," Richard said, already moving toward the cage door. "He'll kill you," Janet said flatly. "That dog has 3 years of rage built up." Richard looked at Max's huddled form, then at Sarah. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe he needs to hurt someone back. The waiver was 7 pages long, absolving everyone of responsibility for injury, dismemberment, or death. Richard signed without reading it. At 6 p.m., as the winter sun set behind the Montana mountains, he opened the cage door and stepped inside. Max's reaction was instant and violent. He launched himself at Richard, jaws clamping down on his right hand with crushing force. Richard heard bones crack, felt teeth pierce through to meet in the middle of his palm. Blood poured onto the concrete floor. Every instinct screamed to pull away, to fight back, to run. Instead, Richard slowly lowered himself to his knees, his hand still in Max's mouth. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. For Lucas. For leaving you. For Derek. For everything." Max bit harder, shaking his head, trying to tear. Richard's vision grayed at the edges from pain, but he kept talking. Voice steady. "You were supposed to grow up with him. Protect him, love him. Instead, you got cage 73 and my brother's rage." Blood ran down his arm, pooling beneath them. "I failed you both, Lucas and you. But Lucas is gone, and you're here, and I'm not leaving you again." Then, incredibly, Richard began to sing through gritted teeth. "Silent night, holy night. All is calm, all is bright." The same song from last night, the same song Lucas had sung to a puppy with miraculous eyes. Max's bite loosened, just slightly. His whole body began trembling. The taste of blood, Richard's blood, seemed to trigger something. A memory, perhaps. Or maybe just the realization that this human wasn't fighting back, wasn't hitting him, wasn't causing pain despite the pain being inflicted. Max released Richard's hand and stepped back, confused, shaking. Richard didn't move, didn't grab his mangled hand, just kept singing. "Round yon virgin, mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild." Max made a sound, not quite a whine, not quite a bark, something broken and primitive. He approached again, cautiously, and when Richard still didn't move, didn't flinch, Max did something that made Sarah gasp from outside the cage. He licked the wound, gently, carefully. The dog, who hadn't shown affection in 3 years, began cleaning the blood from the hand he'd just destroyed. Richard finally moved, slowly raising his good hand to touch Max's head, fingers finding the infected cross-shaped scar. Max froze but didn't pull away. They stayed like that, man and dog, until Harold rushed in with paramedics at 6:45. Max didn't attack them. He pressed himself against Richard's side as they bandaged the hand, refusing to leave his side. 9 breaks in the metacarpal bones," the paramedic announced. "He needs surgery immediately." "After the board meeting," Richard said. At 7 p.m., the board reconvened. Richard stood before them, hand wrapped in blood-soaked gauze, Max on a leash beside him the first time he'd accepted one. When Harold moved suddenly, Max growled but didn't lunge. "Progress." "It's a start," Sarah argued. "First day. Give us 30 days. The vote was 8-4. Max would live, conditionally. December 28th brought lawyers and Judge Patricia Williams, a 62-year-old woman who'd lost her granddaughter to a drunk driver 5 years prior. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Foster, wanted all the mill dogs euthanized. "They're irreparably damaged," Foster argued. "Ticking time bombs. When, not if, one of them kills a child, blood will be on this court's hands." And Richard's legal team, 3 attorneys flown in from San Francisco, countered with expert testimonies about animal rehabilitation. But the moment that changed everything was when Officer Patterson took the stand. "Your Honor, I was first on scene. Patterson said, voice shaking. What I saw in that warehouse will haunt me forever. But yesterday, I went back to see Max. He pulled out his phone, showing a video. This is what I saw. The video showed Richard in Max's cage. The dog pressed against his side, allowing Peterson to approach and even briefly touch his head. That's 24 hours after rescue, Your Honor. If that's possible in one day. Judge Williams gave a 30-day rehabilitation trial, with weekly progress reports required. Richard moved to Montana the next day, purchasing a ranch 5 miles from the sanctuary. January in Montana was brutal, -20 most days. But Richard never missed a session. 8 hours a day, every day. He sat with Max, first in the cage, then in a small fenced area, eventually in a larger yard. Sarah taught him about trauma recovery, about patience, about reading the subtle signs of a dog learning to trust again. Trauma isn't erased, she explained during one session. It's integrated. Max will always carry those 3 years. The goal isn't to make him forget, but to help him build new memories stronger than the old ones. Progress was measured in millimeters. January 15th. Max ate from Richard's hand for the first time. January 28th. He allowed his collar to be removed, the embedded parts requiring minor surgery. February 3rd. He walked on a leash without panicking. February 14th. Valentine's Day. He fell asleep with his head on Richard's lap. Sarah spent most days at the ranch, teaching Richard, but also learning about him. She discovered he hadn't touched alcohol since December 25th, that he had nightmares where Lucas asked why Daddy hurt Max, that he'd liquidated $100 million in stocks to create a fund for all the mill dogs' care. You can't buy redemption, she told him one evening as they watched Max attempt to play with a tennis ball, unsure how to do something as simple as play. I'm not trying to buy it, Richard replied. I'm trying to earn it. March brought unexpected warmth to Montana, snow melting into mud. March 15th, exactly 3 years since Lucas died. Richard and Sarah sat in the yard, Max between them. Richard threw the tennis ball, not expecting much. Max watched it bounce. Then suddenly, miraculously, his tail moved. Not much, just a slight wag, but unmistakable. Sarah grabbed Richard's arm. Did you see? His tail. He wagged his tail. They both started crying, which confused Max, who approached and licked their faces, first Richard's, then Sarah's. It was the first time he'd voluntarily shown affection to anyone besides Richard. We're quite the trio. Sarah laughed through her tears. 3 broken things trying to figure out how to work again. Is that what we are? Richard asked, looking at her in a way that had nothing to do with dogs or rehabilitation. Maybe, Sarah said. Or maybe we're 3 things that needed to break before we could be put back together, right? Max retrieved the ball, dropping it at their feet, tail wagging more confidently now. The dog who'd forgotten how to be a dog was remembering. The man who'd forgotten how to live was learning. And the woman who'd forgotten how to feel was thawing like the Montana winter, 1 degree at a time. But on March 20th, everything they'd built would face its greatest test. A reporter had been digging into Derek's past, into the connection between the Miller brothers, and what they found would threaten to destroy not just Max's progress, but all of them. The video that would surface Derek's hidden recordings of exactly what he'd done to Max, including using drugs to control him, would change everything. Richard's phone rang at midnight on March 20th. Sarah's voice was panicked. Richard, you need to get to the sanctuary now. There's something you need to see before the media gets it. He drove through the darkness, Max in the back seat, heading toward a revelation that would explain Max's aggression, his setbacks, and why Derek's torture had been even more sinister than anyone imagined. The chemicals in Max's system, the methamphetamines Derek had used to keep the dogs awake and aggressive for his amusement, were about to surface. The real battle for Max's life was just beginning. April 4th, 2024. The morning started with such promise. Max had been making steady progress for weeks, walking calmly on leash, accepting treats from strangers, even playing with toys. Richard had brought him to the sanctuary for a supervised socialization session with other rehabilitated dogs, something Dr. Sarah Chen had been building toward for months. The other dog was Bella, a gentle golden retriever recovering from her own mill trauma. She approached Max slowly, tail wagging low, all the right calming signals. Max seemed fine, sniffing her carefully, even play-bowing once. Then something shifted. Sarah would later describe it as watching a switch flip. Max's eyes dilated completely. His body went rigid, and before anyone could react, he launched at Bella with a viciousness that seemed to come from nowhere. It took 3 handlers and Richard to pull Max off. Bella needed 47 stitches. Max, restrained and muzzled, was shaking violently, foam at his mouth, looking like he didn't know where he was. Richard held him as he convulsed, whispering desperately. But Max's eyes were vacant, lost in some internal hell. Harold Morrison called an emergency board meeting that afternoon. The verdict was unanimous. Max had to be euthanized immediately. He'd proven what they'd feared all along: he was irreparably damaged, a danger to every living thing around him. "You have 1 hour to say goodbye," Harold told Richard, not unkindly. "The vet will be here at 5. Richard looked at Sarah, who was reviewing the incident footage for the 100th time. Something wasn't right. Max's reaction wasn't normal aggression, it was almost seizure-like, neurological. But there was no time to investigate. Richard made a decision that would cost him everything. At 4:45, while the board prepared the euthanization room, Richard loaded Max into his truck and drove away. He ignored the calls, the texts, the sanctuary volunteers trying to wave him down. By 5:30, Harold had called the police. By 6, there was an arrest warrant for Richard Hamilton: theft of property, violation of court order, harboring a dangerous animal. The media explosion was instant. Billionaire steals killer dog. Tech mogul chooses violent animal over public safety. Hamilton's latest victim family's golden retriever. The story went national within hours. Every news channel had experts discussing entitled rich people who thought laws didn't apply to them. Richard barricaded himself and Max in his ranch house, pushing furniture against doors, drawing curtains. Max was still shaking, still foam-mouthed, still lost in whatever had triggered the attack. Richard held him on the kitchen floor, both of them trembling, as helicopter searchlights swept across the windows. By midnight, 30 police vehicles surrounded the ranch. SWAT was on standby. Animal Control had tranquilizer guns ready. The lead negotiator, Lieutenant David Brooks, used a bullhorn. "Mr. Hamilton, we don't want anyone hurt. Release the dog and come out peacefully." Richard didn't respond. He couldn't. He was watching Max deteriorate, pupils dilated, jaw clenching, muscles spasming. This wasn't rage. This was something else. Something medical. Something chemical. The standoff continued through the night. CNN, Fox, MSNBC all had reporters on scene. Day 2 of Montana dog siege became the headline. Public opinion was viciously against Richard. Social media demanded justice for Bella. Death threats poured in. April 5th, 2 p.m., 16 hours into the standoff, Sarah Chen arrived at the police perimeter, carrying a box of files. She'd spent the entire night going through Derek's things, which had been in evidence storage. What she'd found changed everything. "I need to speak to Lieutenant Brooks," she told the officer at the perimeter. "It's about the dog, about what's really wrong with him." Brooks, exhausted and frustrated, barely listened at first. Then Sarah showed him the papers, Derek's handwritten logs, hidden in a false bottom of a drawer. Detailed records of drugs administered to each dog, methamphetamines to increase aggression, steroids for dogfighting he'd staged for his own amusement, cocktails of veterinary stimulants, and for Max specifically, the highest doses, sustained over 3 years. "My God," Brooks muttered, reading. "He turned them into addicts." "Max isn't aggressive," Sarah explained urgently. "He's in withdrawal. The attack on Bella, it was a seizure response. His brain chemistry has been destroyed. He needs medical intervention, not euthanization." Brooks shook his head. "Even if that's true, we have a warrant. Hamilton took the dog illegally." "Then let me go in," Sarah said. "I have medication that might help." Clonidine for the withdrawal, benzodiazepines for the seizures. Let me try. The police chief, watching the news coverage destroy his department's reputation, finally agreed. But the conditions were strict. Sarah goes in alone, unarmed, with a wire. Any sign of danger, SWAT goes in. Sarah approached the ranch at 4 p.m., hands visible, medical bag in clear view. Richard, it's Sarah. I know what's wrong with Max. Derek drugged him. All of them. I have medicine that can help. No response for 5 minutes. Then the front door cracked open. Sarah entered to find a scene that would haunt her. Richard had recreated Lucas's bedroom in the living room race car bed. Dinosaur posters. Even the toy box. Max lay in the race car bed, shaking, while Richard sat beside him, holding a photo album, talking to his dead son. "Lucas, this is Max," Richard was saying to the empty room. "He's sick, buddy, but we're going to make him better. Just like you wanted. Remember, you said we'd teach him to fetch, to roll over, to protect our family." Sarah approached slowly, horrified by Richard's break from reality. He looked at her without recognition at first, then seemed to snap back. "Sarah, how did you the police—" "Richard, listen to me. Max isn't aggressive. Derek drugged him with methamphetamines for 3 years. He's in withdrawal. That's why he attacked Bella. His brain is literally malfunctioning." She pulled out the medical logs, showing Richard Derek's meticulous records. Every dose, every drug, every reaction documented with military precision. The final entry, dated December 20th, 3rd, the day before Derek's suicide. "Max at maximum dosage, wondering if he'll survive withdrawal when I'm gone. Maybe that's better." "Derek knew," Richard whispered. "He knew what would happen when the drug stopped." Sarah prepared the medications, explaining to Richard and the wire what she was doing. Clonidine will ease the withdrawal symptoms. Diazepam will stop the seizures. But Richard, this is going to be a long process. Months, maybe years, to stabilize his brain chemistry. She injected Max carefully. The dog barely reacted, too lost in his neurological storm, within minutes. Though the shaking began to ease, his pupils started to normalize. The foam stopped. Max looked at Richard with something approaching recognition for the first time since the attack. "He needs continuous care," Sarah said. "Medical supervision. This isn't behavioral, it's chemical dependency. Derek turned him into an addict, then left him to go through withdrawal alone." The wire crackled. Lieutenant Brooks's voice. "Dr. Chen, can you confirm the dog is no longer an immediate threat?" Sarah looked at Max, now breathing normally, pressed against Richard's side. "Confirmed. He needs medical treatment, not punishment." The next hours were delicate negotiations. Sarah convinced the police that criminal charges would only generate more negative publicity. Richard agreed to convert his ranch into a specialized rehabilitation facility for all of Derek's drug-affected dogs. The sanctuary would have oversight. Judge Williams would monitor, and Richard would fund everything, an estimated $20 million commitment. By April 6th, the narrative had shifted. Billionaire exposes drug torture at puppy mill. Veterans' dark secret forcing dogs into addiction. The public opinion reversed so fast it gave journalists whiplash. Richard Hamilton went from villain to victim in 24 hours. But the real work was just beginning. Sarah moved into the ranch to provide round-the-clock care. They discovered that of the surviving mill dogs, 87 showed signs of drug exposure. Each needed individual treatment plans, careful withdrawal management, and months of rehabilitation. Max was the worst case. The methamphetamine had altered his brain structure. He would have moments where he'd disappear into flashbacks, attacking invisible enemies. Sarah taught Richard to recognize the signs: dilated pupils, raised hackles, a specific whine that preceded each episode. They learned to create a safe space, to ride out the storms together. "He may never be fully normal," Sarah explained one night, after a particularly bad episode where Max had attacked his own reflection for 20 minutes. "The damage might be permanent. None of us are fully normal, Richard replied, exhausted. We're all damaged. We just learned to live with it. It was during this time that Richard found Derek's final package, delivered posthumously by his military buddy. Inside was a hard drive containing hundreds of hours of video, Derek's documentation of his descent into madness. The worst was a video from December 23rd, Derek's last day alive, showing him injecting Max with a massive dose of methamphetamine while crying, saying, "I'm sorry," over and over. Richard couldn't watch more than 30 seconds. Sarah watched it all, clinically documenting every drug, every dose, building a medical history that would help not just Max, but every surviving dog. Derek was a monster, Richard said one night, watching Max sleep fitfully, legs running from invisible pursuers. Derek was sick, Sarah corrected. Untreated PTSD, substance abuse, complete psychological breakdown. He created victims because he was a victim. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. How do you forgive something like this? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. You don't forgive the act. You forgive the broken human who committed it. Otherwise, the anger poisons you worse than any drug. The rehabilitation continued through April. Max had good days and bad days. On good days, he'd play fetch. His tail would wag. He'd seem almost like a normal dog. On bad days, he'd cower in corners, attacking anything that moved, lost in chemical flashbacks to 3 years of torture. But the worst was yet to come. On May 1st, Richard would collapse, and everything they'd built would face its ultimate test. The drugs hadn't just damaged Max's brain, they'd weakened his heart. And Richard's heart, already strained by guilt and grief, was about to fail in the most dramatic way possible. The real question wasn't whether Max could be saved, but whether either of them would survive long enough to find out. May 1st, 2024, started like any other day at the rehabilitation ranch. Richard was in the yard with Max, practicing recall commands. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana grass, and Max had been responding well, his tail wagging as he returned to Richard's side for treats. Then Richard felt a crushing weight in his chest, like someone had parked a truck on his sternum. The pain shot down his left arm, up his jaw. Richard knew immediately what was happening. He'd been ignoring the warning signs for weeks: shortness of breath, occasional chest tightness, dizziness. He'd attributed it all to stress, to the emotional toll of the past months. But as he collapsed to his knees, vision graying at the edges, he understood that his body had finally given up on carrying the weight of his guilt. Max's reaction was instant. The dog began barking, not the broken, soundless attempts of before, but actual barks, rough and painful, but audible. Sarah heard it from inside the house and came running. She found Richard face down in the grass, Max circling him frantically, barking continuously. "Call 911!" she screamed to the ranch hand, dropping beside Richard to check his pulse, weak, irregular. She started CPR, pumping his chest while Max howled a sound none of them had heard him make before, primal and devastating. The ambulance took 17 minutes to arrive. 17 minutes of Sarah keeping Richard's heart beating manually while Max paced and vocalized in ways that seemed impossible given his damaged throat. When the paramedics loaded Richard into the ambulance, Max tried to follow, had to be physically restrained by 3 people. As the ambulance pulled away, Max's howl followed it down the road, a sound of pure anguish that would later be described by witnesses as almost human in its grief. Whitefish General Hospital was 47 miles from the ranch. Richard flatlined twice in the ambulance, was brought back twice. Emergency surgery began immediately, triple bypass, complications with a damaged valve. For 6 hours, cardiac surgeon Dr. Anthony Reeves worked to repair a heart that had been destroyed not just by physical stress but by 3 years of drinking, guilt, and self-destruction. Back at the ranch, Sarah faced a crisis. Max had become completely feral, attacking anyone who approached, destroying furniture, throwing himself against windows trying to escape. She had to sedate him, but when he woke, he was worse. He refused food, water, medication. He sat at the door Richard had last walked through and howled continuously. "He's going to die," the veterinarian told Sarah on day 2. "His throat is bleeding from the vocalizations. He won't eat or drink. If we can't calm him." Sarah made a decision. At 2 a.m. on May 2nd, she opened the ranch door. Max bolted into the darkness before she could change her mind. She'd either saved him or condemned him, but keeping him caged while he died of grief seemed the greater cruelty. The search began at dawn. Police, volunteers, sanctuary staff, everyone looked for Max. The media picked up the story immediately. Hero dog disappears while owner fights for life. Photos of Max circulated on social media with desperate pleas for sightings, but Max had vanished into the Montana wilderness. May 3rd. Richard emerged from surgery alive but barely. The damage to his heart was extensive. Dr. Reeves was blunt with Sarah. He needs a transplant. Without one, he has maybe 6 months, probably less. Sarah started the process, immediately getting Richard on the transplant list, testing family members. Emily flew in from London, still Richard's legal next of kin. She wasn't a match. Richard's cousins, located and tested, weren't matches. The wait for a cadaver organ could be years Richard didn't have. May 4th, 6 a.m. Security guard Thomas Washington was starting his shift at Whitefish General when he noticed something in the parking lot. A German Shepherd, sitting perfectly still by the emergency entrance. The dog's paws were leaving bloody prints on the concrete. Its fur was matted with mud and blood. It was Max. Thomas called animal control, but when officers approached, Max produced a sound that stopped them cold. Not a bark or growl, but a keening wail that seemed to convey pure desperation. Someone recognized him from the news. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered. Max hadn't moved except to howl periodically, a sound that cameras captured and broadcast worldwide within hours. He walked 47 miles. The veterinarian confirmed, examining Max's destroyed paw pads. Through forest, over roads. Some of these cuts are 3 days old. He must have started walking the moment he escaped. Hospital administration was adamant no animals in the ICU. It was a health code violation, a liability nightmare. But Max's howls were drawing larger crowds, and the video of him sitting in his own blood, crying for Richard, had gone viral. 8 million views in 6 hours. The hashtag #LetMaxIn was trending globally. Sarah worked every angle. She called the CDC, got confirmation that a single dog posed minimal risk with proper protocols. She had therapy dog experts testify about the psychological benefits. But the hospital board wouldn't budge until something unexpected happened. Dr. Reeves, the cardiac surgeon who'd saved Richard's life, walked out to the parking lot where Max still sat, now surrounded by news crews. The doctor knelt beside the dog, examined his wounds, and made an announcement that changed everything. "This dog's heart rate is 40 beats per minute," he said to the cameras. "That's dangerously low for a German Shepherd. He's going into cardiac distress from grief. If we don't reunite them, we'll lose them both." The hospital board convened an emergency meeting. The publicity was overwhelming them. Donors were calling, threatening to pull funding if Max wasn't allowed in. At 4 p.m. on May 4th, they voted. Max could have 5 minutes in the ICU, supervised, sanitized, controlled. Sarah led Max through the hospital corridors, his bloody paws leaving prints that janitors didn't dare clean while cameras rolled. ICU room 7. Richard unconscious, machines keeping him alive, chest rising and falling mechanically. Max approached slowly, then pressed his head against Richard's hand hanging off the bed. The monitors spiked immediately, heart rate increased, brain activity surged. Dr. Reeves watched, stunned, as Richard's vitals improved more in 30 seconds than they had in 3 days. Max carefully climbed onto the bed, laying his head on Richard's chest, and began whimpering softly, not in pain, but in relief. The 5-minute visit became 5 hours. Nobody had the heart to remove Max when Richard's fingers began moving, weakly stroking the dog's head. When visiting hours ended, Max refused to leave. Security tried to remove him, and his howl captured on a nurse's phone was so heartbreaking that the video crashed Twitter's servers from sharing. The hospital surrendered. Max stayed. May 5th through 10th became what media called the vigil. Max didn't leave Richard's side except for bathroom breaks. He learned to avoid the medical equipment, to move when nurses needed access, to be silent during procedures. He slept with his head on Richard's chest. And remarkably, Richard's cardiac rhythm stabilized when Max was present. Sarah noticed something extraordinary on day 6. Max's damaged vocal cords were healing. The continuous vocalizations, instead of destroying his throat, seemed to be rehabilitating it. The scar tissue was breaking down, allowing more normal sound production. His barks became clearer, less painful. May 11th, 3 a.m. Richard's heart stopped. The machines screamed their alarms, but before the night nurse could reach the room, Max produced a bark so loud, so clear, so urgent that it brought the entire ICU staff running. Those extra seconds, Dr. Reeves later testified, made the difference. They got Richard's heart started in 3 minutes instead of 5. 3 minutes meant minimal brain damage. 5 would have meant death or vegetative state. The dog saved him, Reeves told reporters. I can't explain it medically, but that bark gave us the extra seconds we needed. But Richard was deteriorating. His heart was failing faster than expected. Without a transplant, he had days, not months. Sarah was desperate, calling every contact, exploring every option. Then, on May 12th, she received a call that would change everything. Dr. Chen, my name is Marcus Thompson. I served with Derek Miller in Afghanistan. I've been holding something for him. Something he asked me to deliver only if Richard was dying. I think you need to see this. Marcus arrived that afternoon with a sealed envelope dated December 23rd, 2023, the day before Derek's suicide. Inside was Derek's final secret, a revelation that would force everyone to confront the complexity of forgiveness, redemption, and the terrible price of love turned to hate and back to love again. The letter began, "If you're reading this, Richard is dying and I'm dead. Good. That was always the plan. My final revenge and my final gift are the same thing. I'm a registered organ donor. I'm also a perfect match for my brother. I had myself tested years ago when Mom was dying in case Richard needed anything. He didn't deserve it then. Maybe he doesn't deserve it now, but the dog does. Save my brother so he can save the dog. Consider it my apology to the only innocent one in this whole fucking tragedy." The letter continued with details: blood type, tissue markers, test results Derek had somehow obtained. Everything confirming what seemed impossible. Derek had planned this. His suicide, the timing, even the preservation of his organs, had all been orchestrated so that if Richard needed them, they'd be available. Sarah's hands shook as she read the final lines. I spent 3 years torturing an innocent animal because I couldn't torture the brother I loved and hated in equal measure. Maybe my heart will do better in his chest than it did in mine. Tell Max I'm sorry. Tell Richard I never stopped loving him. Tell them both that sometimes the only way to fix something is to break it completely first, then rebuild it with better parts. Hospital Ethics Board, emergency meeting, May 13th. The debate raged for hours. Could they use organs from a suicide victim who'd specifically planned his death to provide them? Was this posthumous consent valid? Was it ethical to give a heart to someone whose drunk driving had killed a child? The Ethics Board meeting stretched through the night of May 13th. Dr. Patricia Morse, the hospital's chief ethicist, had never faced anything like this. She held Derek's letter, reading the key passage aloud for the 4th time. I had myself tested 3 years ago. O-negative blood, matching HLA markers, even the rare antibody profile. We're not just compatible. We're perfect matches. Funny how brothers who couldn't stand to be in the same room share the same biological blueprint. This is premeditated organ donation via suicide, argued board member Dr. James Clayton. If we accept these organs, we're validating suicide as a method of donation. The precedent is terrifying. But the organs are viable and already harvested, countered Dr. Reeves. Derek Miller died 5 months ago. His organs have been preserved at the Montana Organ Bank because he was a registered donor with no specified recipients. We only now discovered his intent. The legal representative shifted uncomfortably. There's also the matter of the recipient. Richard Hamilton killed his own child driving drunk. Some would argue he doesn't deserve. That's not for us to decide. Dr. B. Morse interrupted. We evaluate medical need, not moral worthiness." Sarah had been silent until now, but she stood suddenly. "I need to tell you something about Derek Miller." The room turned to her. "My husband, Marcus Chen, died in Afghanistan in 2020. He was in Derek's unit." Her voice trembled but remained steady. "I've been reading the unit reports, talking to survivors. Derek held Marcus as he died, for 2 hours, under fire. Derek refused to leave him, even when ordered. Marcus was gut-shot, dying slowly, and Derek held him, talked to him about home, about me, promised to find me and tell me Marcus loved me." She paused, wiping tears. "Derek never found me. I learned this only last week from another veteran. Derek was too ashamed, too broken by PTSD to face me. But he kept a photo of Marcus in his wallet until the day he died. The man who tortured those dogs, who destroyed his brother's life, also refused to let my husband die alone." The room was silent. "People aren't just their worst acts," Sarah continued. "Derek was broken by war, by untreated trauma, by a system that failed him. He became a monster. Yes, but he died trying to make amends the only way he knew how, by giving life back to the brother he'd tried to destroy." At 6 a.m. on May 14th, they voted. 7-2, the transplant was approved. But Richard refused. When Dr. Reeves explained the situation, Richard's reaction was violent. Despite his weakness, he tried to pull out his IVs, monitors alarming as his heart rate spiked dangerously. "Not his heart," Richard gasped. "I don't deserve his heart. He tortured Max because of me. Lucas died because of me. I can't." Max, who'd been silent, stood on the bed and placed his paw on Richard's chest, directly over his failing heart. The dog looked into Richard's eyes and made a sound, not quite a bark, more like a word, almost like please. Sarah took Richard's hand. "Derek's letter had more. Should I read it?" Richard nodded weakly. Sarah continued reading Derek's final words. "I know you'll refuse at first. You always were too proud to accept help, even when Mom was dying. But this isn't about you or me. It's about Max. That dog survived 3 years of hell because somewhere in his DNA is a will to live that I tried to break but couldn't. He deserves someone who'll love him the way Lucas would have. You're the only one who can do that, but not with the heart you have. Take mine. It's the only thing I have left that isn't poisoned." "There's more," Sarah said. "Derek documented everything about Max, not just the abuse, but observations. He wrote that Max would sometimes escape his cage at night, not to run, but to check on the other dogs. Even after everything Derek did to him, Max would share his food with weaker dogs. Derek wrote, 'I tried to make him cruel, but his nature was stronger than my nurture. He's better than both of us. Richard, save him.'" Richard looked at Max, who was now licking the tears from his face. "You'd want me to do it," he whispered to the dog. Max barked clear, strong, decisive. June 15th, 2024, 5 a.m. The surgical team prepared for one of the most publicized transplants in history. Media crews waited outside, the story having captured global attention. Brother's Heart, A Tale of Redemption, was already trending. Richard was wheeled toward surgery. Max tried to follow, was held back by Sarah. The dog's howl echoed through the hospital, not anguish this time, but something else. Encouragement, perhaps, or goodbye. The surgery would take 9 hours. Max sat outside the OR doors the entire time, occasionally whimpering but mostly silent, as if he knew that his voice, finally healed, needed to be saved for when it mattered most. Sarah sat beside him, and halfway through, she felt compelled to whisper something she'd never told anyone. Marcus's last words were about his dog back home. He made Derek promise to make sure Buddy was loved. Derek found Buddy's new family after Marcus died, visited monthly to check on him until the family moved away. She looked at Max. "Maybe that's why Derek couldn't kill you completely. You reminded him of a promise he'd kept when everything else had fallen apart." At 2:47 p.m., Dr. Reeves emerged from surgery. Before he could speak, Max stood, tail wagging slightly, the first time anyone had seen him wag his tail without Richard present. The transplant was successful, Reeves announced. There were complications. The heart had some unusual scarring, likely from Derek's combat injuries, but it's beating strongly. Richard's body accepted it immediately, almost eagerly. I've never seen such rapid integration. The recovery would determine everything. Whether Derek's heart could power Richard's redemption, whether Richard could finally forgive himself, whether Max could trust a world that had shown him such cruelty. The next hours would reveal if broken things could truly be rebuilt with better parts, or if some damage ran too deep even for love to heal. Max was allowed into recovery as Richard woke. The first thing Richard heard wasn't the machines or nurses, but Max barking clear, strong, joyful. The sound of a dog who'd found his voice just as Richard had found his brother's heart. Two beings saved by the man who'd tried to destroy them both. Derek's final revenge transformed into his final gift. December 25th, 2024. Christmas morning arrived at Second Chance Ranch with a soft snowfall that transformed the Montana landscape into something from a greeting card. But this was no fantasy. It was 137 real dogs, each a survivor of Derek's mill, playing in the white expanse. Their barks and howls created a symphony that would have been heartbreaking noise a year ago. Now it was the sound of healing. Richard stood on the porch, Derek's heart beating steady in his chest. The surgical scar had faded to a thin line, but Richard touched it often, a reminder of the brother who'd saved him through destruction and salvation both. Beside him, Sarah Hamilton, they'd married quietly in September, watched Max lead the pack across the field. Max had become something between therapy dog and ranch foreman. His titanium prosthetics on two frostbitten toes gleamed in the morning sun as he herded the younger dogs away from the fence line. His bark, fully restored, rang clear across the snow. He wore a vest now, Chief Comfort Officer, a title that made visitors laugh until they saw him work with the most traumatized new arrivals. Judge Patricia Williams arrived first, carrying her traditional Christmas coffee cake. Officer James Patterson followed with his adopted mill dog. Rosie, who'd been in cage 12, Dr. Reeves came with his family, his children immediately running to play with the dogs. Even Harold Morrison from the Sanctuary Board appeared, having become one of the ranch's strongest supporters. The video call from London connected at noon. Emily appeared on the laptop screen, her new husband beside her. The divorce had been finalized, but not the connection she'd forgiven Richard. Understanding that Lucas's death had broken something in all of them that could only heal with distance and time. Max looks wonderful, Emily said, watching him through the camera as Richard turned the laptop. Max heard her voice, ran to the screen, tail wagging. He remembered her. "We have news," Sarah announced, taking Richard's hand. "We're pregnant." The celebration was immediate. Though Richard's eyes filled with tears, Sarah continued. "It's a boy. We're naming him Lucas Derek Hamilton." Judge Williams raised her coffee mug. "To second chances. To broken things made whole," Patterson added, as if on cue. Max suddenly alert barked, his signal that something needed attention. He ran toward the barn, looking back to ensure Richard followed. Inside, huddled in the hay, was a stray, a female German shepherd, thin, scarred, clearly another mill survivor who'd somehow found her way here. Beside her, 5 newborn puppies, still wet, squirming for warmth. Richard knelt slowly, and the mother dog watched him with terrified eyes. But Max approached her, gentle, communicating in the way traumatized dogs understand each other. She relaxed slightly. Then Richard saw it one puppy, smaller than the rest, opened its eyes. One blue, one brown. "Impossible," Sarah breathed. "The odds of heterochromia occurring again." "Maybe not impossible," Richard said quietly. "Maybe necessary." Max carefully picked up the heterochromatic puppy in his mouth, soft retrieve trained now, and placed it in Richard's hands. The puppy mewed, tiny voice seeking comfort. Richard looked at Max, who sat perfectly still, tail wagging slowly. "Every ending is a beginning," Sarah whispered, the same words she'd said at their wedding. The Christmas sun set over Second Chance Ranch, painting the snow pink and gold. Inside the main house, the fireplace crackled. Max lay beside it, the heterochromatic puppy between his paws, teaching it the safety he'd learned so painfully. Richard's hand rested on Max's head, Derek's heart maintaining its steady rhythm in his chest. Lucas's love living in every rescued dog on the ranch. On the wall, 3 photographs hung in simple frames, Lucas laughing on his 7th birthday, Derek in dress uniform after receiving his Purple Heart, and Max running free through his first snowfall after recovery. Below them, a wooden plaque Sarah had commissioned, Second Chance Ranch where broken hearts heal together. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the dogs were settled, Richard found Max on Lucas's bed. They'd kept one room exactly as it had been, not as a shrine, but as a reminder. Max was dreaming, paws twitching, small woofs escaping. But these weren't the nightmares that had plagued him for months. Richard could tell by the tail wags, the peaceful expression. Max was dreaming of running, of playing, of being loved. Sometimes, Richard said to the sleeping dog, to save a soul, you have to let that soul save you first. Max's ear twitched at Richard's voice, but he didn't wake. He was safe. They both were. Saved by the brother who'd tried to destroy them. Rebuilt with his heart, literally and figuratively. The circle of pain had been broken. The cycle of love continued, eternal and unbreakable. Outside, snow began falling harder, covering the last traces of the day's activities. But in the barn, the new mother dog nursed her puppies, warm and protected. Tomorrow, the work would continue. More dogs to save, more trauma to heal, more second chances to offer. But tonight, on this Christmas, exactly 1 year after the beginning of their salvation, they rested. Max shifted in his sleep, pressing closer to the tiny puppy with miraculous eyes. Richard watched them, hand over his brother's heart, feeling it beat with purpose Derek had never found in life but somehow delivered in death. They were all broken things, rebuilt with better parts, stronger at the mended places. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all. This story reminds us that family isn't always bound by blood. Sometimes it's forged through shared trauma and mutual healing. Richard learned that gratitude isn't just about appreciating what we have, but accepting what we've lost and still choosing to love again. Max, despite 3 years of torture, taught us that gratitude can exist even in the darkest places, that a tail wag after abuse is the purest form of forgiveness. Derek's story shows us that even those who commit terrible acts might be victims themselves, failed by systems meant to protect them. His final gift, his heart literally beats in Richard's chest, proving that redemption can come from the most unexpected sources. The ranch became a family of broken souls, traumatized dogs, grieving humans, all learning that gratitude means accepting help, offering forgiveness, and understanding that healing happens together, not alone. Every rescued dog at Second Chance Ranch represents a choice to be grateful for survival rather than bitter about suffering. Richard's journey from a drunk driver who killed his son to a man saving hundreds of abused dogs shows that gratitude transforms guilt into purpose. Have you ever witnessed someone society wrote off like Derek, a veteran with PTSD who became an abuser, redeem themselves in an unexpected way? When do second chances become possible for the unforgivable?